So the Sega Dreamcast is probably my favorite console that I've ever owned, and in this video we're going to go ahead and take it and turn it into this. This is Steve from Restalgia, and let's get started. If this is your first time here, please consider going down below the video and subscribing as we are working our way towards 30,000 subscribers. So this is actually a mod that I've been wanting to do for quite a while, and I know that there's a few different options in terms of what you can do to a Dreamcast, and if you wanted to replace the optical drive, there's always the TerraOnion MODE, which just came out recently. There's also the GDEMU device, and then there's another device that allows you to plug in USB drives, and what I've decided to do is go with the GDEMU mod, 1 because of cost, 2 because of availability, and 3 because of ease of install. Now the GDEMU, if you are not familiar with it, is more or less an optical drive simulator that goes in place of the GD Rom Drive on the actual Dreamcast, and it essentially allows you to play backups directly off of an SD card. Now it is very important to note that you can only do the GDEMU mod safely if you have a revision to Dreamcast, which essentially will have the number 1 circled on the back of the console right next to the region. Luckily, the 2 Dreamcasts that I have laying around are indeed that model, which incidentally can also play backup discs without the use of a mod chip. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is start disassembling this thing and getting the top cover off. But I do want to talk a little bit about what GDEMU version I'm using. So there is an original version which typically retails for around $300 to $400, but it's also pretty hard to find. And then there are a ton of clones available on Amazon and eBay. I opted to go with one of the clones. I just ordered it directly off Amazon for about 80 or 90 bucks. But you can always pick these things up for as low as $60 to $70 on eBay if you're willing to wait a little bit longer for shipping. Next, I do want to mention that Laser Bear Industries sent this little 3D printed SD card reader to use in the Dreamcast to kind of fill the space that was originally occupied by the drive. So I do want to give a shout out to them. Thank you guys for sending this out to me. Now this 3D printed kit is going to come ready to install. It has all the necessary screws, and it's actually pretty easy to put together, as I'll show you guys later on in the video. Now I figured since I'm going through the process of disassembling this thing, I figured why not make this Dreamcast really stand out? And I was actually able to find some really awesome high quality replacement shells on eBay, and these came in a wide variety of colors. I actually reached out to a couple of my friends and I sent them some of the color options and I said, what do you guys like the best? And based on popular demand, and actually what I like the best too, I decided to go ahead with the transparent deep blue color. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure what I was expecting. This thing was about $100 Canadian plus shipping, but the material and the quality on these things are completely on point. It genuinely looks and feels like the original case, with the exception of the Dreamcast sticker that does look a little aftermarket, but even still, the whole thing as a package looks pretty awesome. Now this video is not going to be a full tutorial, but more of an overview, and I am going to show you guys all the steps on screen for those who want to follow along, but this is by no means an in-depth tutorial on how to do this project. With that being said, this is a very simple and novice level mod that most could attempt with little to no problems. Since we already have the top of the console removed, the first step is going to be transplanting all of the components into the new blue shell bottom. Now the first thing that we need to have that comes out is our GD Rom Drive. Now this is something we're going to take out. We will not be putting back in, but it is really simple to take it out. There are essentially 3 screws that are securing it in place. Once they are removed, you can actually pop the entire drive out of the connector with absolutely no issues. Once that's out of the way, we are going to go ahead and remove a couple of the screws holding down the fan on the right hand side of the console, but there's not any need to disconnect it from the board it's connected to. We just want to remove those screws so that way we can actually move it around and remove it when it's time to do that. Now moving on to the power switch and the power supply. First, it is always a good idea to engage that power switch a few times, and the reason you want to do that is because if there is any residual current left over stored up in a capacitor, you want to discharge that so it's much safer to handle the power supply. Now just like with the fan, we can unscrew the 2 screws holding the power switch down, and we're going to set those aside, and then we have 2 additional screws that are holding the power supply down to the actual shell. We're going to go ahead and remove that, and as I'm taking it out, I do want to mention that there is actually a replacement power supply that you can pick up for the Dreamcast called the Dreamcast Pico PSU, and this is a really great option for those who have their power supplies that are either failing or starting to go, but mine's actually fully functional, it's completely normal, the capacitors are all in good shape, so I'm going to end up reusing it because there's nothing wrong with it, but if you are one of those people with a failing power supply, you may want to consider taking a look at the Pico PSU. Once we've got that power supply out of the way, there's also going to be a plastic guard that we want to remove, and we're going to reuse that in the installation on the new shell. Now moving over the controller ports, this is actually pretty straightforward. There's a few screws that we need to remove right along the front of the console, and then you're going to need to angle that board out in order for it to slide out properly. So just be mindful not to yank it out, or you will end up damaging the shell. And once you've got it loose from the shell, there's going to be a ribbon cable that you're going to need to disconnect from the main PCB and set aside. Now the last thing that we really need to transplant is obviously our main PCB board. There is a bunch of screws going around the perimeter of the board, and all we really need to do is remove them out, and the board will actually kind of pop straight out. You can just literally lift it out, but I will mention there's also metal shielding that is in the base that's almost kind of wedged in there. You are going to want to remove that and transplant that to the new shell bottom as well. All that's left for us to do now is go through the exact same process, just in reverse, in order to reassemble, essentially getting us to a point right before adding the GD Rom drive. So now that we're pretty much set, we're going to go ahead and assemble this 3D printed housing for the GDEMU device. I mentioned earlier the kit that Laser Bear Industries sent out to me includes everything that you need. You've got the 3 3D printed parts consisting of the frame, the shell, and the reset button, but we are also going to get all the screws that are necessary, as well as a pre-attached SD card reader extension. So there's 2 screws included that will attach the GDEMU to the frame. Then we're going to go ahead and insert the SD card extension as well as the reset button, and that just kind of slides right into place. And then we position the frame to line up with the shell, and then there's 4 additional screws that are used just to attach 2 on either side to get everything held together. All that's left for us to do is connect the serial port from the GDEMU to the main board and use the final long screw to attach through that frame into the Dreamcast housing as a standoff. We are going to need to recycle one of the original GD Rom Drive screws on the rear of the kit to further secure it to the board. And then finally, before we close this up and finish the mod, it's also important to talk about one last step that we should consider. Now this is completely optional, but I do highly recommend it, and there's actually a really great installation guide on the RetroGamesUltra.com website that goes into detail about this, which I will leave some links to if you guys want to check it out in the description. But with the GD Rom drive gone, the 12-volt rail that typically would have powered that drive is actually left without any real load, since the GDEMU doesn't require anywhere close to the same kind of power. Because of the lack of the load, it can actually cause the power supply to output 14 volts, which will essentially cause the console to heat up quite a bit. So what we're going to do is offset that voltage difference by grabbing 3 1 kilo ohm half watt resistors. We're going to tie them up in parallel, and we're going to actually place them across the 12-volt rail and a ground pin. And this creates a resistance of about 330 ohms and will help keep temperatures normal within the console. The other benefit to that 3D printed kit is because it keeps the same shape of the GD ROM, it'll actually help continue with the proper airflow within the console, which again will just help keep everything nice and cool. After we get that resistor in place, we can go ahead and reassemble the top shell by putting the 4 screws together, and we're almost done. We still need to do the network adapter to match the shell, and this is super easy. There's 2 screws holding it in place, you pull them out, you transplant everything to the new cover, and then you replace those screws. And there we have it, so our reshelled Dreamcast with the GDEMU mod, with a 3D printed drive replacement, and it looks really, really cool. And although we're done with the physical assembly, we still need to prep an SD card, And actually, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my computer for that, but there's a really cool software that makes the whole process nice and easy called SD Card Maker for GDEMU, and that's developed by Mad Sheep. Now, I'm going to be using version 1.1, which is the latest version, and all you really need to do is make sure that your SD card is formatted to FAT32, and then you actually add all your games in through the program. Now, it does support CDI and GDI format, and for this application, my recommendation is looking for GDI format, as this is a true one-to-one rip of the disc. All CDI versions of any Dreamcast game are essentially user-created alterations of a GDI format in order to shrink the game down enough to kind of fit on a commercially available CD-ROM for the purposes of backing up. This is done by trimming out audio and video segments, as well as any other graphical elements that they're able to kind of compress or remove that they don't deem as necessary. So CDI files are fine if you want, but if you're looking to have the original gameplay experience, you're definitely going to want to use GDI files for your SD card. There's also a little button in the software called Menu, and we are going to want to check that, as it will run a patch that prevents the game list from taking a long time to generate on the Dreamcast. This isn't really an issue if you're only going to be loading up a few games, but if you are going to be filling up a big SD card with a large collection, you're definitely going to have issues, and checking this as an option will absolutely help to correct that. Next, you hit save and you begin writing to your SD card, and that's more or less it. Once it's done, we can go ahead and take that SD card, we can pop it into the Dreamcast, and we can boot up our console. And if you've done everything correctly, you will end up booting directly into the GDEMU menu, and here, we're actually going to have access to all of our titles that we loaded up, and we can even access a menu to make minor setting changes. Additionally, some games are actually going to come bundled in with some disc art and others aren't, but this is going to be something that can be manually added for all titles, but I didn't really bother with it for my build. Launching a title gives you the exact same experience you would get if you were putting an original disc in there. You get the original Dreamcast splash screen displaying, and then the game plays right after that. It runs exactly as though you were playing an original disc. Every single game that I've tested played perfectly, and honestly, it was a great experience. The last thing I will mention is that the GDEMU is a read-only, meaning that it does not save your games or does not create save states on the actual SD card. The data is a one-way street, and you will still need a VMU to save your gameplay. But saying all of that, if you guys are interested in doing a mod similar to this, I'll leave some resources and some links, and any purchase links that you guys would need down below for you guys to check out. But that's pretty much all I've got for you guys in this video. I do think that in a future video, I'm going to take a peek at the TerraOnion mode, and I might even add an HDMI port to this thing. Let me know in the comments section if that's something that you guys would be interested in seeing. Also, if you guys can let me know what your favorite Dreamcast game is. If you guys know of any hidden gems I should play, let me know. Share this video and hit the thumbs up button if you liked it, and the thumbs down button if you didn't. But thank you so very much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys again real soon.